Welcome. In this video, we're going to show you how to build a CFA-44 Nosferatu from the video game Ace Combat. A special shout out goes to everyone on the sub Ace Combat on Reddit for inspiring us to build this fictional fighter jet. We're going to start by building the fuselage base, and then we'll add the upper fuselage shortly after. This video was time-lapsed, since the total build time was about 6 hours. If you want to slow the video down to view it in real time, then set the video speed settings to 0.25. We're going to need to cut out a top and bottom piece for this fuselage base. So keep watching to see how we create it by adding in some ordinary craft foam. Now, we trace out the bottom piece of the fuselage base. Got it. Now we'll cut it out with our 5-inch precision scissors. Now that we have both pieces cut out, we'll reinforce them with strips of can. This will make both pieces sit flat, so we don't have any warping when we glue them to our craft foam. Great! It's starting to flatten out already. See the difference? We're almost done reinforcing the first part of the fuselage base. Our glue of choice for making these models is Loctite Super Glue Gel. We get a lot of questions about how we glue these models together. And, in our opinion, nothing is better than Loctite. Okay, now we start reinforcing the other half of the fuselage base. This piece needs to be strong, since it will be supporting the entire aircraft once it's completed. If the piece is warped or bent, the whole plane won't look right. So we need to take our time with this part of the build and get it right. As you can see, we're using some scrap root beer cans that we had lying around to reinforce these pieces with. This way, we can save our primary cans for building the outer structure of the model and minimize the total can usage. We're almost finished reinforcing the other half of the fuselage base. We'll need to add an additional component to complete the piece, which you'll be able to see shortly. And we're finished. We're going to finish the construction of our fuselage base piece by cutting out a piece from some craft foam. This foam piece will give our model some added depth, so the wings and control surfaces aren't completely flat. By using black craft foam, it will also bring out the black accents in the cans and make it look that much better as we progress in the build. Now, we'll overlay the can and see how it came out. It's really important to trim off the excess foam before gluing it to the can piece, as we are demonstrating here. This way, if we make a mistake, it's far easier to fix by just cutting out another foam piece, which we couldn't do if it were already glued to the can piece. Everything looks ready to glue together at this point. But we'll need to do some more trimming once the pieces are assembled together. Now, we're just about ready to glue the bottom can piece onto the foam. Once it's glued together, we'll do some final trimming. Next, we'll start on the upper fuselage piece. This is another critical component, because it mounts to the top of the fuselage base. The all-important forward fuselage will go over this assembly later on. Now we'll use a ruler to fold in all of the glue tabs. Now that we've cut out the upper fuselage and folded in the glue tabs, it needs to be rounded. You'll need a rounding tool, such as a wooden dowel, which you can see that we're using in this step. Rounding certain pieces is a critical step when working on any aircraft model, and more specifically, certain fuselage pieces. Next, we'll trace and cut out the forward fuselage piece. Again, we're using the rounding tool to round the forward fuselage. Rounding, as we said, is critical for this piece, because if you don't round it enough, the piece might be warped or crooked, and you may have to make it all over again. Once we finish rounding the piece, we glue it along the glue tabs. On this model, we've opted for a 3D printed nose cone. The G code for this nose cone will be available with the plans, as will the templates, for making your own can nose cone. To see how we construct a can nose cone, watch our F-15 Eagle video, and check out the 1921 mark of the video, to see how it's done. Adding strips of can to the inside surface of the forward fuselage piece will help prevent bends and buckles. So keep this in mind. Now, we glue the nose cone into position. A little more reinforcement on the inside surface of the forward fuselage might be needed before and after you get the forward fuselage installed. But for now, we'll set the fuselage pieces aside. Now we move on to the intakes. Getting these cut out as precisely as possible will be critical. The fold sequence will be very important as well, so watch the folding sequence as closely as possible. Now, watch closely how we fold the intakes. Make sure each fold is as crisp as possible. This will help to avoid warping. Refold any areas that are not creased as tightly as you would like. Keep in mind, the last two fold lines are glue tabs and will need to be glued on an overlap. Check your fold progress by test fitting the intake cover over the front opening of the intake. This will tell you if you're getting close to the right shape. Reinforcing the inside surfaces of the intakes with strips of can will help with warping and help straighten out the piece. Finally, glue along the glue tabs as shown, when the piece is shaped correctly. Now that we have one of the intakes completed, we can finally start assembling the fuselage. We start the fuselage assembly by test fitting the upper fuselage to the fuselage base. Next, we mark off the position on the base piece, then we start by gluing the upper fuselage down, one side at a time. Now, glue the rear down on the base, then we work our way up the other side. Finally, we glue the remaining forward tabs down. Then, we test fit the forward fuselage over the assembly. Next, we measure and mark off the center point with an ultra-fine point marker. This will help guide the piece into position so it's straight. Now, we finally glue the forward fuselage into position. Next, we take a moment to trace out our twin vertical tail fins before we start work on the second intake. Carefully, we fold the second intake, just as we did the first. Again, we make sure that we've made crisp fold lines to avoid any warping. We glue along the glue tabs, then check our work against the other intake piece. If it looks the same, then we're ready to move on to the intake covers. We even out the intakes, using a pair of pliers. Then, we add a last bit of reinforcing to the intake opening. For each intake cover, we're going to form a piece out of craft foam, then glue a piece of can over the top of it. Let's watch and see how this works. We trace the foam onto the can, then put the can piece over the opening, and then trim it to fit. Next, we use our rounding tool to hold the intake cover in the intake mouth, then when we're ready, we glue it into the mouth, using the dowel to hold it in place. Once we have it glued into position, we use the template to glue in the rectangular piece, which will give the intake opening the signature look that this aircraft is known for. Now, we repeat the process to complete the remaining intake. Next, we make sure to reinforce the intake cover with a strip of can, so that it doesn't warp. Now, we glue the foam to the strip of can we use to reinforce the piece. Next, we glue the intake cover over the opening, as we did with the previous piece. Finally, glue the rectangular piece we cut out of black can over top. The black can will make the intake openings stand out. Next, we'll add some black can accents to the rear of each of the intakes to break up some of the natural can color. Now, we're ready to test fit and install the intakes. Again, we'll use an ultrafine point marker to mark the position of the intakes on the underside of the fuselage base. Now, we repeat the same steps to install the remaining intake. Finally, we glue the remaining intake into position. That wasn't too bad, was it? Next, we're ready to trace and cut out the two main engines. Make sure that on these two engine pieces, you make the cuts indicated on the templates, and then onto your can pieces when you trace the engine parts onto them. Also, make sure to cut the tiny glue tabs at the front of each engine, which are indicated on the templates. Next, we roll the rear part of the engine, and glue along the glue tab. Then we roll the front of the engine along the tab at the front, then glue on a slight overlap. Then, we round them into shape to get them ready for installation. Now test fit them, and trim off any excess can, as needed. Then we repeat the same steps to create our remaining engine. Next, we'll add some accents made out of black and silver can, to give our engines a more natural look. Using different, solid color cans, goes a long way towards setting these models apart. And now we add accents to the second engine. Once we have both engines completed, we're ready to install them. We'll use craft foam by cutting it into strips and gluing it to the inside surface of the two engines. If we layer it up high enough, the foam will help securely affix the engines to the top of the fuselage. Let's watch this process in action. Watch how we glue the foam pieces into a stack. Then, we glue them to the underside of each engine as shown. We test fit the engines into position Then we glue them to the top of the fuselage. Next, we add some silver trim to the top of our engines. We also extended the tail sensor between the engines. We used our base template, traced out a top and bottom piece out of can. Then we glued foam in between the two pieces, then glued it to the end of the existing piece. Next, we cut out and construct our twin vertical tail fins. To make the fins, we'll need a top and bottom piece out of can, plus some strips of can, to reinforce each piece. And, we'll also need a piece out of our craft foam. Let's watch and see how it's done. First, we glue the strips of can to the inside surfaces of the tail fins. Then, we glue the foam in between. Trim off any excess foam, as needed. Before, you glue the remaining can piece over top. Repeat the same steps to complete the remaining tail fin. Why do we use craft foam? Because it looks more natural than just making flat control surfaces, and it works better than cardboard. Finally, we glue the twin tail fins into position, as shown. You may need to secure them in place with a strip of can bent at a 90-degree angle. If you watch closely, you can see us secure the left tail fin with this technique. Now, we're ready to make the all-important canopy. We'll do this with some clear vinyl we purchased from the craft section of our favorite retailer. We'll use a hobby knife to make the 4 slits shown on the 2 sides of the canopy. The reason we do this is to create small glue tabs, so we can glue each corner of this piece on a slight overlap. This will help shape the canopy. Watch how we do this. Next, we need to line the bottom edge of the vinyl with black can. This will create the canopy frame. Using a different color can than the color you are primarily working with will give the model some added contrast and really make the canopy stand out. Once we have the canopy framed, we can trim off any excess can with our hobby knife. And we've finally completed the canopy. Now, we're ready to test fit and install it. Once we have the position of the canopy worked out, we dab glue onto the front and rear inside edge, then glue it into position. And there you have it. One ready-made, clear canopy for our neat-looking Ace Combat Fighter jet. In this final part of the video, we'll tidy up our model by adding some accents and cleaning up the can surface with some can we have left over. And we're finished. Our CFA-44 Nosferatu model is now complete. Total build time, from start to finish, is just under 6 hours. And here's the virtual walk around. Thanks for watching. Make sure to like and hit the subscribe button to be notified when we drop our next amazing video. See you next time.